doing the segment on this particular What Does the Bible Say school. Caleb and I have been working feverishly, and we were in Greensboro trying to insert ourselves into some communities over there yesterday, and so now we're sharing the time. I appreciate you being with us today. And so I want to begin today with this slide having to do with the stage, the world stage. Do you realize what is going on the world stage all the time? You know, we go about our lives and we just, I guess we think things are the way they are with us. They're that way everywhere. Like we're fixated on groceries and fixated on gas and fixated on, are we going to come out of the pandemic? Are hotels going to get back? Is Disney going to get back? All those kinds of things. And we do not realize that behind the scenes, there is a constant motion that its design is to destroy each other. Somebody wanting to rule. This is 30 years ago. This is the first place that I lived in the Pacific, Pago Pago. And you don't see an N there. It says Pago Pago, but the Samoans call it Pago Pago. You know, one of the things that amazed me about living there is seeing Chinese. You've got Chinese fishing boats that are in and out of this area. We moved to Micronesia, and where I actually was going to work in the Marshall Islands, and what do you see? You see the Chinese building an embassy in the Marshall Islands. Well, what is American Samoa? I guess American Samoa is, if it's not a state, it's a territory at this point. What's the Marshall Islands? The Marshall Islands actually are a protectorate. They have a very special status with the United States in that we can have bases or missile guidance or whatever over there in those islands, and it's staging ground for us to be able to strike if we need to strike any of the people like China. Well, what did I see while I was there? Chinese building an embassy there. Why? Well, if you are a Marshallese, if you're a citizen, you can actually come into the United States as a citizen. You get all the benefits. You are in a protectorate that was taken away from the Japanese. Well, what's the Chinese wanting to do? The Chinese are over there fishing the waters, and if they giving out gifts to the Marshallese, and if they can get a passport, a Marshallese passport, boom, they're in the United States. Why would they do that? That's what I just said. This stuff is going on all the time. And this morning, what I'm going to try to help us to realize is all of it has to do with biblical stuff. And we don't realize that we are actually, or should be, the masters of our universe because of the fact of us having knowledge. Are you watching the news these days? And when I say these days, I'm saying as far back as all the ISIS business, the interruption in the Middle East. You know, when I was a kid, I'm 62 this year. When I was a kid in the 60s, they are always talking about the Middle East. Now, if you're 10 or 12 years old and someone says to you, Middle East, it's like, okay, East has to be relative to something. East what? But they just kept saying Middle East, and I'm saying everybody evidently knew what was going on because they didn't stop to explain it in the newsreel. We only had 3 stations in those days. They never stopped to explain it to young people, you know, that are coming of age. They just started keep talking about the conflict that's in the Middle East. And again, East is not a place. It has to be related to something else. And now, you know, basically I know now, Middle East. This area is an area of conflict. And as we're watching Russia right now, and I'm not even getting into that. I haven't seen a newsreel in at least 15 days, maybe even more. I thought they had actually stopped in Ukraine. I didn't realize it was still going. I just don't let them feed my mind. But I am playing on the world stage. Let me tell you, I know what's going on the world stage. When Russia was involved and still is involved before with Assyria, you know what they were doing? Why I said Assyria. Why did they need to be in Syria? Why do you think Russia was so determined to support Assad, his regime in Syria? What's so important about Syria? Well, it is the Middle East. And then number 2, Putin knows that basically American superpower is always going to be fixated on Israel. And you've got to have your staging platform if you're going to be a player in the world whenever whatever comes down actually comes down. What are you talking about comes down? America thinks that Jesus is coming back to Jerusalem. And all Christian religions pretty much believe that same thing. Our presidents, Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, Clinton, they believe this too. The Bushes believe this. I don't know about President Obama because of the fact that he had different positions. I would say his pastor that he originally went to in the United Church of Christ has nothing to do with the Church of Christ, the body of Christ that we're associated with. When he was with him, pretty sure that he believed in some kind of premillennial idea. And for sure, Donald Trump is definitely pro-Israel, put an embassy in Jerusalem. Why? Jesus has got to come back and reign in Jerusalem according to them. Well, guess what? Russia is not going to be left out. They've got a staging platform for whatever comes next in the fact that they have Syria. Do we not realize that as you, let's just say you say to yourself, I'm not going to be a Bible student, so it's not really that serious. Everything that is going on has to do with Bible land and is motivated by the ideology that a superpower thinks this is the most important real estate on the face of the earth. Not to mention the fact that there just happens to be oil in all of this area too. So you've got these rich individuals that'll be pumping the black gold up out of the ground. And it's all about this staging ground and everybody's keyed in on it. But here's the thing. Most people who should be knowing that this is actually why people do what they do, they don't. And it's because they don't know that the Bible is always going to be God's Word, God's plan that is actually in play right now is always going to be the focal point of everything in the universe, except in our brain. It's like this space in our brain, we just don't let God's plan get in, but God's plan is involved, and everything centers around information associated with what God has said is going to happen, was going to happen, and people just don't know it. Today's program, that's what we're doing, is we're trying to help you to realize that everything before, everything that is, all centered around this point right here, Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. When the fullness of time was come, God sent forth His Son, made of a woman, made under the law. Now, what are we basically saying? We're saying that all the earth time before this was about this. If you're reading in Genesis 3, you're reading about this. It's actually planning to get right here that the Son of Man was basically going to come on the earth when the fullness of time was come. Now, what does that even mean? Y'all, it basically means that God has something planned and it's all going to happen and transpire according to His plan. And if we could actually get a hold of this, if we'd actually get a hold that everything before this time frame was pointed at this time frame, was pointed at this verse, we would actually begin to realize, this could be a puzzle that isn't all that difficult for us to actually get a hold to. And so let's just basically say this, put it this way. Galatians 4:4, in the fullness of time, look at this. When the fullness of time was come, God sent forth His Son, made of a woman, made under the law. Tie this, Galatians 4, to Romans chapter 4, verse 12. And the father of circumcision to them that are not of circumcision only, but also who walk in the steps of the faith of our father Abraham, which he had yet being uncircumcised. Galatians 4:4 is tied to Romans chapter 4, verse 12. Jesus is coming in the fullness of time, is what Paul said. He actually is looking backwards when he said that. When the fullness of time was come, Jesus, the Son of God, came on the scene. Everybody basically had to be in some way influenced by the knowledge of a Hebrew named Abraham. How in the world is Abraham going to be the father of all the faithful? Everybody who also walks in the steps of that faith of our father Abraham. See, 90% of the Christian world, so-called Christian world, sectarian world, thinks that Adam is our father. And they don't even realize that we're supposed to be spiritually minded, looking at another individual, and this individual is the important individual, not Adam. And how does that tie in? Well, that's basically what we're talking about today. How is it that God could be able to get Abraham as a focal point and actually tie that together with bringing his son into the world? Well, the first thing that God did in order to start that to happen is Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house into land that I will show thee. Where is that land? Middle East, as they call it today. It is actually right here in this little strip of land between Africa, Asia, and Europe is connected as well. And so basically what we're seeing is by God putting a family that was over here, the other side of the Euphrates, in the Mesopotamian valley, he calls him to come over into the land of Canaan. And by the way, who is Canaan anyway? Canaan is the son of Ham, who is said to be cursed. Ham's descendant, Canaan. Cursed be Canaan. They were going to end up being a wicked people. Abram is called out of his homeland, an idolatrous place, into this dangerous land where the Canaanites live. And for what reason? In order to be able to tie himself to Galatians 4:4, in the fullness of time, God is going to bring his son onto the stage. What does that have to do with anything when we really get down to it? I'm saying, when you're saying that this is the way it's going to happen, what does that have to do with anything? Okay, here we go. Abraham, right here in Canaan. And then what? How is this going to influence everybody or anything? Look at this. This is Moses' statement to the children of Israel as they're going in to Canaan land. Look at this. It's the end of Moses' life. And he's reminding these Israelites that basically have just 40 years earlier come out of Egypt. They've come through the Red Sea. They went into the wilderness and they refused to fight. And so basically the people around that had heard about the amazing events associated with the Pharaoh of Egypt, his destruction, the plagues, the destruction of their ideology or their picture of their gods, completely destroyed by what God did to them. And then their army was destroyed in the Red Sea as the children of Israel were delivered over into the wilderness. But what happened to them? Well, a lot of people just thought that their God just let them go into the wilderness and the wilderness ate them up. But the thing is what was happening is the generation that wouldn't go had to die, and the generation next was actually being groomed and tuned as a nation to go in and take the land of Canaan 40 years later. You know, sounds like a movie, doesn't it? Sounds like, if you watch classics, sounds like Lawrence of Arabia. They came out of the wilderness and they basically flanked Canaan on the south, or the southeast actually, came around and came up through Jericho and then across the Jordan River, and they basically began their conquest. Well, what does Lawrence of Arabia have to do? Lawrence of Arabia, basically the story, even though this part may not be true, he is a real figure in World War II. And he supposedly came through the desert and with about 100 people, and he came to Aqaba, which is on the Gulf. It's right here. If you're looking at our map, here is going to be Aqaba right here. It is actually the Gulf, and then that's the Indian Ocean that you're looking at. And supposedly Lawrence of Arabia came up out of there with 100 men, and all of the guns were pointed towards the ocean. And supposedly he came on their flank and basically destroyed them or overcame them, and that gave them free reign right up into what? This right here. Well, that part wasn't true. But can I tell you this? As fantastic as that sounds, Israel having the ability to know that they're going to flank their enemy and come in the other way and surprise them, that is, there's no way they would have that mindset. And there's nobody who does battle like that. Listen, I lived on an island named Kwajalein. And actually, the war story about Kwajalein is that the Japanese never believed that the American Navy would attack them from within the lagoon. And so all of their guns were pointed to the ocean side. And guess what the Americans did? Exactly what they said it couldn't be done. They came into the lagoon and all the guns were pointed in the wrong direction. I'm saying when you start putting biblical literature together with reality, it could be that people that are in high stages of the armed services, it could be they actually study the wars having to do with what you see in the Bible, how things were done. There are plenty of ambush stories, ambush accounts in the Bible. But see what we're basically saying? So you've got Abraham in this area. He's lived in this area. His people come to Egypt, and they're now out of Egypt, and they're coming out of the wilderness, and they have 600,000 plus in their army. And basically, here's Moses talking to them towards the end of his life. Behold, I have taught you statutes, judgments, even as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do so in the land whither you go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them. Here we go. For this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this is a great nation. This great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what nation is there so great, who hath a God so nigh unto them, as the Lord our God is in all things that we call upon him for? And what nation is there so great, that hath statutes and judgments so righteous as all this law which I have set before you this day? So Moses is basically saying that people throughout the world are going to see you, and they're going to see your statutes and your laws, and they're going to realize this is so wise. This is such a great set of statutes and laws and civil association, the way we treat our neighbors and things of that. And they're going to come away saying, this is a great nation, a great God. And what's that all associated with? It's associated with Abraham being in this particular area and his descendants coming back into this area. And now they're influencing everybody. Well, what's the point of all this? Did we not say we're tying Romans 4:12, Father Abraham? We're tying that to Galatians 4:4. Father Abraham is actually the father of Jesus when you get down to it. Jesus is the descendant of Isaac and Jacob, whose name is Israel. Jacob's name is changed to Israel, and one of his sons' name is Judah. One of his sons is David, and Jesus comes from the line of David, all the way back to Abraham. So Abraham's people are going to be influencing everybody, and in the fullness of time, God's going to bring his son, made of a woman, made under the law. And it's basically going to help individuals actually turn and look at the faith of Abraham. They look at the love of Jesus, the love of God, and they look at the faith of Abraham in the Old Testament and his descendants, and you're supposed to actually be able to live the life that was designed for you. Is that how that is? Well, number one, I think there are a lot of people who say, I can't even believe that this even took place, that Israel actually affected all of the nations around, like Deuteronomy chapter 4 said. Well, you know what? I can't help if you don't believe it, but I can tell you that the Bible says it. By them being in this area, and we're going to look at a professionally edited video here in just a bit as far as how this area is viewed by the whole world. But look at this. That was that last slide, Deuteronomy chapter 4. Look at this, 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 1. We're going to move ahead several hundred years. 1 Kings 10:1, Solomon is king, and when the queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, look at here we go. This great God, for this your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this is a great nation, is a wise and understanding people. For what nation is there so great, who hath a God so near unto them, as the Lord our God is in all things that we call upon him for? And what nation is there so great, that hath statutes and judgment so righteous as all his laws which I set before you? She heard of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord. She came to prove him with hard questions. It's basically happening. They're sitting right there in this particular land. What's so special about that particular land? We're going to see it as we go. And look what she says, 1 Kings 10, verse 7. She's one of the nations, the Queen of Sheba. Howbeit I believed not the words until I came, and mine eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceedeth the fame which I have heard. What did she hear? She heard concerning the name of the Lord and the wisdom and the understanding that Solomon, the king, who was put in place by this great Lord, and she wanted to know more. Did Deuteronomy 4 come to pass? Absolutely. These individuals have been influencing the entire world. How does a nation like this, how does it influence the entire world? Well, let's put into play a couple of scriptures, and then we're going to basically demonstrate how this actually, in the mind of God, you can see that it is just such a precision act for God to have Abraham come into Canaan because of the way Canaan is situated. How did they influence all these people? Well, how about we look at Psalm 106, verse 34 and 35. They did not destroy the nations concerning whom the Lord commanded them. They were supposed to go into Canaan land and get all of the Canaanites out of there. Remember what we were saying? They came out of the wilderness, flanked them on the southeast, and they came in and they were supposed to get them all out. They didn't do it, but look what happened. But were mingled among the heathen and learned their works, and they served their idols, which were a snare unto them. When you mingle with individuals, one of two things is going to happen. You're going to influence them, or they're going to influence you. In this particular instance, they did not actually dominate the people that they were supposed to dominate. And as a result of the fact that they didn't dominate them, didn't remove them, they mingled with them and they learned their works. What that basically means is you began to be one of them. Just you're born into the world, you're born into a family that is involved with these heathens. Your parents have done like the heathens, and you just basically, your instincts are put into your head by your parents who have mingled with these individuals, and you learn their works, and you don't even know that you're actually behaving naturally. And when we say naturally, we're not talking about how a dog that is trained to go after a quail or to go after after geese or whatever, like a Labrador. We're not talking about that kind of instinct. We're talking about an instinct that is put in you as a result of your cultural surroundings and the information that is put in your head by your parents. And if our parents are involved with heathens and we're not dominating them, we're not the dominating force in the sense of we're pushing back and we're holding our place as far as God is concerned and His teachings, guess what? We're going to end up leaning their way. And when our children come on the scene, they're going to learn those works and they'll never know the difference. They just think that's the way it should be. And often you never even have a conscience at all about something that you're doing and the way you're treating people. Just say, for instance, in America, the race issues that we have. A lot of individuals come into the world and their parents knowingly or inadvertently, sometimes it's inadvertently because their parents actually acted the same way. You come into the world and your parents consciously or inadvertently, they teach you by example and sometimes by word that other people that are not your nationality are not as important as your nationality is, particularly white, black, white, Hispanic, white, Asian. And I'm not in the critical race theory stuff right now. I'm just saying this is the way it works. You learn as a result of mingling. Now, why is that so important? Because we're actually talking about how in the world did this end up happening? How is it that the statutes and the laws that the Jews have, how is it that that was going to influence? Well, we saw the Queen of Sheba come along, and we're basically now fixing to reverse Psalm 106, verse 34 and 35 in your head. Are you ready? Acts 15, verse 21. And Moses of old time hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day. So the very same thing that the heathens were actually doing to the children of Israel because the children of Israel weren't staying faithful and being the dominant force, always pressing their ideology, their great God, in such a way that people like the Queen of Sheba would come and want to see what she had heard for herself. Moses is being preached in every city in the synagogues. And this basically is our clue as to how in the world all these people, all individuals, would know about Abraham, would know about the Jewish people, would know about their special place, at least in their mind, and their God. And by mingling, they would actually learn their works, or they actually could. You know, folks, this is actually, if you want to get down to it, this is commentary on Romans chapter 2, verse 14. Look at this. You want commentary on the Gentiles which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law? For when the Gentiles which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these, having not the law, are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience bearing witness, and their thoughts, the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another. How is it that Gentiles actually have the works of the law written in their hearts? Show the works of the law written in their hearts. I can tell you, they have been mingling with the Jews. What does that mean? You don't have to just like be best friends with the Jew to actually be influenced by Abrahamic Hebrew Jewish ideology. What does that mean? The Jews end up being a dominant factor wherever they go. They're trying their best to dominate the civil government. And you might say, you know, that sounds like Jews today. No, that's Wall Street that they're trying to dominate. They're not worried about the civil government from the standpoint of how we treat each other. They are basically much like the Jews of the olden days that were taken into Babylonian captivity because they would not stop working on the Sabbath day. They basically were always in trade. It was all about materialistic things, and they didn't even keep up with the idea of what they were supposed to be doing, which is influencing the nations till the fullness of time when God would send forth his son made of a woman, made under the law. But did you see how that worked? Gentiles were continually being involved with the Jews. The Jews are all over the world, but particularly the Jews are connected to that one landmass that we were saying. And so what ends up being said, Ezekiel 5:5, thus saith the Lord God, this is Jerusalem I have set in the midst of the nations and the countries that are round about her. So ultimately, God is putting Abraham in this particular land of Canaan, and Jerusalem is going to be in the midst of the countries that are round about her. And she is to influence all of these individuals to the point where they will be saying, what a great God, what great laws. And they will be ready, many of them are already fine with accepting Abraham, the Hebrew people, their lineage, their God, their history. It's certainly well known the Jews never let their historical documents not be known by the neighboring people around them, and they are always trying to conquer so that they can get back into the position where they can do as they please, which generally wasn't what God was wanting them to do. So here we are. Abraham is put here, and the question remains, why here? Let's bring in a video. Now, this video that I'm going to play first here, it might interest you. It really did me. I didn't realize this. I mean, I certainly realized that President Obama used the word ISIL, and the previous presidents said ISIS. And you know, oftentimes when an administration changes, I just basically thought that President Obama wanted to be different, and he didn't want you harking back to the previous regime. And so it's just, you know, it would be one of those things where I'm the president now and I can set the stage. Donald Trump did the same thing. You know, I'm basically saying you basically try to get the people off of the other regime and you try to get them into your ideology and your plan. I thought, you know, that's just basically what he's doing. But it really wasn't, as it turns out. Take a listen.
Tonight I want to speak to you about what the United States will do with our friends and allies to degrade and ultimately destroy the terrorist group known as ISIL. And ultimately destroy the terrorist group known as ISIL. And ultimately destroy the terrorist group known as ISIL. and
Did you hear
ultimately
that?
destroy.
ISIL. Well, you know the other regime, the other presidents were saying ISIS, ISIS. So basically, they were saying the Islamic State of Iraq and Israel. Now, or basically Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Got to get your acronym right. It's ISIS, State of Iraq and Syria. Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. President Obama was calling it the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. Oh my, that's, what in the world? What is that? Is that like somebody trying to be maybe suave and debonair? No, it is absolutely not. If you are a Bible student, you would basically say, no, I get that. I'm saying if you're a student that is learning, you would eventually come across this. Take a listen to our video.
The general location of the land of Israel and how it functions as a land bridge between three continents. Let's note where Israel is located. The land of the Bible sits at the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. It is a land bridge between three continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa. The land of the Bible is not a make-believe or fairy land, but a real place on our earth. The Bible is a record of real events. Israel is relatively small. Here,
Okay, so
Israel's size, the blue shape.
Israel, very, very small. That is really small. It's like you're having to believe that the state of New Jersey can influence the entire nation, the entire world, entire thinking process of everybody that's ever been on the face of the earth. That something that small. Let's go back then, because you might be saying, whoa, now I missed something.
The general location of the land of Israel and how it functions as
a land bridge?
A land bridge.
What does that mean? Well, if you're looking at this video is going to spell this out as we go along. As you're looking at this, you can tell, if you know anything about maps, that this evidently doesn't look all that fertile, this area. And this is, it's actually a desert right here. And so if you're wanting to go over into Mesopotamia, you want to go into Asia proper, or if you're wanting to go into Egypt, Africa, Ethiopia, if you're coming from Europe, let's say you're coming in from Italy here, or Great Britain up there, which I don't even know how far people were spread out during the time frame. But I know that Paul was headed for Rome. And so even back in the days of Abraham, if you were wanting to go to any one of these places, if you're wanting to come from there to here, if you're wanting to come from there to Europe, you're going to end up coming through this area. It is a land bridge. This is a desert. This is the Mediterranean Sea. It's a great obstacle. This is a great obstacle. In order for you to get to these places, Asia, Europe, and Africa, you're going to need to come through this particular area, which is a land bridge. And it has always been a strategic holding area because it enables you to move your troops around. It enables you to stage events into any of these three continents. It is a very extremely important piece of real estate, and it always has been. And God knew what he was doing when he told Abraham to be there and influence everybody. People will end up accepting, as a result of you being and your descendants being there, they will accept the faith of Father Abraham. Why? Because Father Abraham will be talked about, the Hebrews will be talked about from time immemorial. They will not ever not be known. And that is one of the keys to being able to teach people that don't believe the Bible. That's one of the keys to being able to teach them. These historical individuals situated in this particular place that is so decisive, and it's still decisive today, as we said a moment ago. Even Putin needs to make sure that he has a platform to stage whatever is coming down, because he knows that the Americans and all the so-called Christians in the world, they believe that this is the piece of real estate that Jesus is going to come and conquer, set up his 1,000-year reign in the city of Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. It hadn't happened for 2,021 years. Or 2,000 years. Hadn't happened. Who's there? Well, the Islamic dome is actually sitting supposedly on the site where the temple was. So they are not getting anywhere at this point. But see how, did you know that the Bible was so intricately involved in all of this? Continue. Let's move ahead to 26 and we'll start listening again.
Note on the right, Israel's landmass is about the same size as New Jersey, the fifth smallest state in the United States. But in spite of Israel's relatively small size, this little land has had a huge impact upon history. This is undoubtedly because of God's association with the land and people of Israel. The Lord says in Ezekiel 5:5, "This is Jerusalem. I have set her in the center of the nations, with countries all around her." God indicates in the Scriptures that he would make himself known to the world through the people of Israel.
Did he do it?
In the land
Queen
of
of
Israel.
Sheba, we just saw it just a few minutes ago. Did he do it? Absolutely, he did it.
Events in this small land would give evidence that the God of the Bible is the true God and that there is no other. Map 12.1 in the Satellite Bible Atlas shows the borders of the modern countries in the Middle East. Let's take a closer look at Israel's position as a land bridge between three continents. Note the two ancient cradles of civilization, Mesopotamia and Egypt. The route between Mesopotamia and Egypt is funneled through the land of Israel because the Arabian Desert to the east and the Mediterranean Sea on the west present difficult obstacles for travel. As a land bridge between continents, the land of Israel has historically been coveted by big empires in Egypt and Asia. Any kingdom interested in expanding military, economic, or political interests would set its sights on
You
Israel.
seeing that?
as a
If you're in Egypt and you're wanting to make headway in Syria or over here in Babylon or in Assyria, Nineveh, guess what? You're going to have to get there. And you're not going to want to go through the Arabian desert. So what do? You basically need to control this land bridge. Same thing with here, Turkey. If they're going to come in and they want to invade Egypt, same thing. Unless you want to go across the Mediterranean, which you have to have a special situation going. You have to be having ships and things of that nature. They have great storms on the Mediterranean. So this is just all these armies, conquering armies coming through, and Israel remains there until this day. Now, the Israel of today, those are not real Jews. But I'm saying people who believe the Bible have made sure that Israel gets to remain on the map just because they believe they're God's chosen people, even still the physical Israel, physical Jews, and so they have kept it in place. Historically, you cannot get rid of God's plan and the record of God's existence and his people that were associated with him. See how amazing this is, and this is just a part.
bridge for expansion. Later in history, Europe got into the picture. This is a well-chosen land for the Lord of the earth to demonstrate in sometimes subtle, yet concrete ways, his sovereignty over the kingdoms of men. The history of the Jewish people with the land of Israel is evidence that the God of the Bible is the true God who alone transcends time and space. Before we look closer at the land of Israel, there are a few other features and terms of the ancient Near East to be familiar with. We will use map 2.1, a map showing Abram's migration from Mesopotamia to Canaan, to mark out the Fertile Crescent. This is an area shaped like a crescent that extends from the Persian Gulf north along the Tigris and Euphrates river basins through modern Syria, and then down along the eastern Mediterranean seaboard. It is a land with enough water, either from rivers or rain, to produce crops. The Fertile Crescent is made up of two parts. Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers, the Euphrates and Tigris. This is where Iraq is today, and in ancient times was the center of both the Assyrian and Babylonian empires. The other part of the Fertile Crescent is called the Levant.
The other part of the Fertile Crescent is called the Levant. That's what President Obama was actually calling. He was referring to a well-known fact of what Levant means. But let's stop just for a minute and go back to this. Hebrew actually means beyond the river. So when they were talking about the Hebrews had come over into the land of Canaan, they were basically saying people on the other side of the Fertile Crescent, beyond the river Euphrates, and had come into this area of the Fertile Crescent, the Levant, or the land of Canaan, as it was known, because it was inhabited by the descendants of Ham. Cursed be Canaan, the descendants of Ham, wicked individuals descending from Ham. They were not made wicked, they became wicked. And so President Obama liked the idea of Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. And it is, in fact, correct. It's basically just as correct to say the Levant. Listen to what the description is.
The Eastern Mediterranean seaboard. Levant means raised up. The area is characterized by hills and valleys, plateaus and mountains, some over 9,000
So
feet
God, in
in
His
elevation.
wisdom, put Israel here. It's very difficult to conquer. It's not as difficult today to conquer, but guess what? Israel isn't Israel to God. You can fly a plane in there just as easy as you can fly a plane anywhere. But up until the time that God brought His Son on the scene, the fullness of time, it was very difficult to come in and overwhelm Israel. Why? Because of the features of Levant. You've got this obstacle for your enemies coming in here. If you, by command, have been told to get rid of all of the inhabitants along the seacoast, which they were told, the Philistines, get rid of all of them, then anybody that comes in and invading, then they have to actually come onto the land and they have to be able to set up a stage where they can come in and defeat you that way. Difficult. This way, mountains. You have mountains to the east, and a person would have to come in and cross the mountains, which is very difficult. God's people were in a haven, and He situated them there for that purpose, for their protection, during a time frame when He was trying to fulfill His promise and demonstrate that He had brought Abraham's descendants to the fullness of time. Jesus basically comes on the scene. Today, God does not care if a plane flies in and bombs these individuals. And the features of this land have nothing to do with the way the features had in biblical times. So, but here's the thing. People still believe, as we said, that this is God's chosen people and that it is the Holy Land. It's the Bible land, but it's not the Holy Land. Well, Putin doesn't care what you think about it. He has Syria and he has a staging platform so that he can fly jets in there in case we decide that we're going to take this, because some president like Ronald Reagan in particular, Ronald Reagan thought he was placed in a position for a particular time and that Jesus was about to return. That's one of the reasons that he was so focused on the USSR, because of the redness associated with them. And see how this stuff goes? All of these individuals that end up being enemies of America have something to do with red. Korean, look at their flag. Japan, the rising sun, empire, they had red on their flag. What is Russia? It's always going to be like this, and it keeps people just like entranced and trained in. You know what? It's not important. What's important is what actually happened as time went on. This is why God had them here. This is what God was up to. Now, here's the thing. I've got to really speed up here because I want to make some application here. Y'all, one of the reasons that the Bible doesn't influence us is because, as our heading says, we won't let truth push through when we read the Bible. What does that mean? We read the Bible, and the Bible characters end up being like Marvel characters to us. We're reading this, and we're listening to it. It's like fantasy. For some reason, we don't realize that we could be any one of these individuals. What does that mean? There's no way I could be an Abraham, or there's no way I could be a David. There's no way I could have that kind of influence, is what we're actually saying. Have you ever stopped to think just for a moment how things in the real world are? I have a few things here. We read figures as if they're comic book characters, make-believe. And why? It's too fantastic to be true. It's too fantastic that we could see ourselves arrayed alongside of these individuals. Why? We accept the story of John D. Rockefeller. Do you know the story of John D. Rockefeller? Rockefeller was one of the richest men on the face of the earth at one time. The son of a con man, bigamist, philanderer, run around with women, accused rapist. And John's first job paid 15 cents a day. By 1872, he owned 22 of the 26 refineries in Cleveland, and later 90% of the nation's oil was refined by Standard Oil, which he was in charge of. He left $80 million to the University of Chicago. Well, what was his start? Nobody could, who can get to that point? That's, this is epic, biblical. These are people like we look at in the Bible, just, world powers. No. John D. Rockefeller's father was just any man's father. In other words, he actually didn't even have as good as a lot of people. What about Harlan Sanders? Learned to cook when he was 7. 1952, he franchised his chicken recipe, and the rest is history. The Colonel has a store in Collinsville, Virginia, right down the road from the TV station. See how that works? Why is it that we don't realize that we intake rags to riches stories all the time, but yet when we're reading the Bible, it's like, these are too fantastic. I could never be one of those individuals that have that kind of influence. Well, here you take Muhammad Ali. He's a young black man from Louisville, Kentucky, one of the most famous men in the world. Why? Because he could throw a knockout punch and he shot off his mouth on a regular basis. He was known everywhere. Rumble in the Jungle, you just say it in any country that has movies, and all countries have movies, they will know who Muhammad Ali was, and they definitely knew when he was alive. Elvis Presley, born in 1935, 2 hours after his stillborn twin brother. His father floated hot checks, was in prison. His mother survived on charity from churches, friends, and governments. And what did they call him? The King, Elvis. Can you imagine being born 2 hours after your twin brother was born dead? I've never even heard of such. I know it happens, but I just never heard of somebody else being born after a dead baby comes out of the womb. Elvis Presley. Oh, this is stuff of fantasy. No, it's rags to riches stories, and it is throughout our entire life. And why in the world we won't let truth push through and realize that we could influence in a tremendous way. You don't have to be the king of rock and roll. We're not rocking and rolling anyway. What are we talking about here? Well, just say another character. We're saying richest man, best singer, best boxer, but Johnny, you're talking about individuals that were known all over the world for their wisdom and their knowledge and their power and the strength of their kingdom. All right, how about this? Adolf Hitler, born in Austria, Germany, went to jail after joining 2,000 others in an attempt in a coup, involved in a coup in Munich. He had been in World War I. He was in the hospital because he had been in a mustard gas attack, and he was hurt. He gets out of jail. He gets involved with these other 2,000 individuals, and basically they're in an insurrection. He basically wrote his book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, in prison, in jail while he was there. Later, he ended up in his third try. He got 34% of the vote, and you basically know the rest. He blamed the economic crash in Germany and Austria on the Jews in Germany in 1929. They were the Wall Street class of Germany and Austria. How did he do it? Do you realize the lowliness of his start? Mark Zuckerberg. What is Facebook? He basically launches Facebook, and the next day 1,000 people had registered. My understanding of how that is it was a contest having to do with putting girls up on there and voting which one was the prettiest or whatever. And he had 1,000 people registered within 24 hours. A friend of ours built a website, and 2 co-workers of mine actually got 1,400 people in 24 hours all over the nation to go to that website. In 24 hours. Yeah. Well, we didn't go on and start Facebook. We weren't trying to start Facebook. We were trying to alert people to the era associated with polishing the pulpit. And it's still up there if you would like to see it. Just write it down, ptpera.org. ptp.era. It could be .com, but I think it's .org. PTP, polishing the pulpit. Era.com. And you'll be able to see the speakers that are still there in 2019 when that was put up. They're going to be back supposedly in 2022. You can't have that kind of influence. Folks, that is the myth that the devil wants to make sure that you believe. So we're back now to Kings. 1 Chronicles 11:5, and the inhabitants of Jebus said to David, Thou shalt not come hither. Nevertheless, David took the castle of Zion, which is the city of David. What is it? It's in the midst of all the nations. And what is it doing? The children of Israel, the Hebrews, the people who have this great law and this great God, they are actually mingling with all the nations of the world. And David and Solomon in particular were conquerors, and Solomon's kingdom was a reigning kingdom in the world during his lifetime. Now, mingling with the people, basically, people were learning the works of the Jews, and they were worshiping the God associated with the Jews. Thus saith the Lord God, this is Jerusalem I have set in the midst of the nations and the countries that are round about her. That was then. This is now. This was all by design to keep people focused on Jerusalem. Why? In the fullness of time, when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law. And where was he sent? Luke 23:33, and when they were come to the place which is called Calvary, there they crucified him and the malefactors, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Luke 23:38. And a superscription also was written over him in letters of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. This is the King of the Jews. Everybody gets to understand what is said about him when he was crucified. Latin is the Roman language. Greek language was also involved as far as people knowing, like if you knew Latin, you would also know Greek because you had conquered the Greeks and they were a world power. And it's also in Hebrew, the King of the Jews. What does that basically mean? It basically means that God did what he said he was going to do, and it influenced the entire world. Was there anybody that didn't know about Jesus? Well, when Paul went on trial in Acts chapter 26, he said to a Hebrew king in front of a Roman governor, he said, this thing was not done in a corner. And he himself was being charged with insurrection as a result of the fact that he was elevating Jesus as a person who some said were dead and he said was alive, and he was about to go to the Supreme Court for the charges of insurrection against the government of Rome. What's the insurrection? He basically was saying there are no gods. There is but one God, and his son Jesus raised from the dead to demonstrate that there is that God and that Jesus came to give us the information, the fullness of time, sent forth his son. Now, do you think that when something goes to the Supreme Court in the United States that everybody knows about it? Well, some cases do, like Roe versus Wade. Here's a man that is about to go to the Supreme Court, like the center of the universe, Rome, and be tried for charges of treason, insurrection, or something. Right in Acts 26, Festus doesn't know what to say to Augustus Caesar about this guy. And they both determined after hearing him preach that he should have been let go had it not been for the Jews trying to undo God's plan, which is impossible to do. Now, does it not seem to you the case that you should be interested in biblical literature, given the fact that even Putin is sitting here with a staging ground in Syria so that he can handle whatever comes along, because these foolish Christians think that Jerusalem and Israel is still Israel, the one that God was trying to keep in place until he got his son? Not happening. Galatians 4:26, but Jerusalem which is above is free, which is the mother of us all. Father Abraham is the person whose faith we are to exemplify. Jesus is the Son that came for us and to demonstrate the love of God, to deliver us from the fear of death and the bondage associated with that fear. Sin being the factor that creates the fear, Jesus undid that by demonstrating that he raised from the dead. Therefore, sin had no ability to keep him in the grave. Now, y'all, there's some important stuff there that we just can't get into at this point. We only have like 6 or 7 minutes, but man, you mean to tell me that you're skipping all this? And that here's the whole world doesn't realize that it's the spiritual Jerusalem, and they're still over here working on that real estate. The center of the universe. Not anymore. That purpose has been fulfilled. Now, here's the question. What are we trying to do? We're trying to get you to take your place on the world stage. We're trying to get you to realize that this isn't fantasy and that you can be an influence. You don't have to be a John Rockefeller. You don't have to be King David or King Solomon either to be an influence. You know, when it gets down to it, God has all kinds of needs. Luke 22, verse 10, and he said unto them, behold, when you are entered into the city, there shall a man meet you bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house where he entereth in. And that's exactly what they did. They met a man who was carrying a pitcher of water and had a room ready for the Lord and King of the universe to have the Passover with his disciples. Well, is he important? Yes, he's important. Each and every feature, everything that you do is important, and it is in particular, it's especially important when you are doing something that God wants you to do. And it came to pass, Luke 19:29, when he was come nigh to Bethpage and Bethany at the mount called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying, Go you into the village over against you, in which at the entering you will find a colt tied, whereon never man sat. Loose him, bring him hither. And if any man ask you, Why do you loose him? Thus shalt thou say unto him, Because the Lord hath need of him. They that were sent went their way and found, even as he said unto them, as they were loosing the colt, the owners thereof said unto them, Why loose you the colt? And they said, The Lord hath need of him. Well, I don't have a donkey. He don't need a donkey right now. He doesn't need an ass. What do you have that you can use in the service of the King? I don't know if I'm getting this. Philippians 2:12. You're about to get it. Wherefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God which worketh in you, both to will and to do his good pleasure. Do all things without murmuring and disputings. Do you realize that if you're being obedient to God and you're trying to follow his commands, that you are actually working out his good will and his pleasure? Jesus said to the man with the possessed son, If thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believe. Are you a person who believes in God's way? Are you a person who takes things because God basically puts them on your plate and you just basically say, this is not personal, I'm going to do what I can because the cause is going to be of the Lord, and I'm working out my own salvation and I'm doing his will and it's his good pleasure? Look at this. Do you realize that there are people on this earth that are actually more like Lamech than they are Jesus? Who is Lamech? Well, I forgot. Genesis 4:23. Lamech said unto his wives, Adah and Zilpah, Hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. You know how many people take things personal? And they basically say, I am going to wound you 70 times 7 for the wound that you gave me. But what does the Bible say? What's God's good will and pleasure? Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, Vengeance is mine, I'll repay, says the Lord. Are you like the Lord or like Lamech? Do you know the reason that we're on in front of you today? It's because we do not take things that people do to us personal. We do not get in personal conflicts with people over things they have done to us. We stay focused on the Lord's will, and we know that if we're doing that, it is God's working in us, and we're actually accomplishing his good pleasure. That's your place on the stage. My question today is it the case that you recognize that it's just that simple? Really? Do you realize the time that people spend on personal affront? I'm saying if you would just work on that one thing in your life, do you know you would have so much energy to put into other issues that you didn't even dream of it? If you just started on that one thing, say, everything that's being done to me, I'm not going to respond and take it personal. I've got a Lord to serve. I'm not Lamech. And all of a sudden, you would be free from so many problems. As my offspring were coming up, I always told them, you are not a reactor. You're an actor. And when one of the offspring would get the goat of the other one, as they say, what we would do is we would laugh and say, ding dong. And what does that mean? He's ringing your bell. See what that means? If you're reacting, he's ringing your bell. I'm not a reactor. I'm an actor on a stage, and God has a tremendous plan for me to be involved in, and this is not a fantasy when we read about it. We are just as likely to be as influential as these individuals, and we may never know it, but that doesn't change anything. If John D. Rockefeller can get to where he was with 15 cents a day starting out, Colonel Sanders starting out with the way he started out selling his recipe for cooking chicken, man, you can do better, and so can I. And this is why we want you to study Kings and Chronicles with us. Thanks for being with us today.